Hey everybody, this is Mike Honeycutt with Corero Network Security, and I'm joined by a very special guest today. But before I introduce him, I want to take a second to introduce the talk today and what we're going to be covering. Today's episode is called Beyond Ransomware, the DDoS threat healthcare cannot ignore. And we're going to go into that with this discussion. And obviously, this is going to be a very honest, practitioner-led discussion. That's why I've got my good buddy here, Jeff Benson. Jeff, I'd love for you to take a minute to introduce yourself, tell everybody about your background. Be super helpful for the audience.
All right, Michael, happy to be here. So once again, my name is Jeffrey Vinson, longtime SVP, Chief Cyber Information Security Officer in healthcare here in the Texas Medical Center. And for those listeners, the Texas Medical Center is the largest in the world for hospitals, clinics, and healthcare providers. Wow. So I've been in this space for over a decade. Also prior to that, I'm a retired Army officer. Did a little work at the NSA and also part of the FBI Houston's field office counterintelligence task force. So I got about 30 years in the space. So I certainly understand it very well. And I also understand the threats that are happening from an operational standpoint to healthcare and healthcare systems. So happy to be here.
Man, what a background, man. Well, thank you for your service. That's great, man. So, I'm going to ground the conversation, and the reason why we're talking about this today, it's ever prevalent, but, in 2024, the NHS experienced a significant DDoS related disruption, and Stryker, a major medical supplier, had been affected, and healthcare continues to rank in the top 3 most targeted industries. And so, you've got experience in this. And so I'd love to with your decade in healthcare and what you just said, in your experience, why is DDoS the most underestimated threat in this space? Why is nobody talking about it?
Well, that's a great question. And again, when you look at what's happening, what continues to happen, I'll say healthcare bubbled up in 2015 with the large Anthem breach, right? You had about 78 million records compromised. But when you look at DDoS is not really looked at in a, I'll say, singular fashion, because they look at ransomware. Part of our discussion is, we talk about ransomware all the time, but DDoS actually impacts what we call care delivery, right? Care delivery, resiliency for a hospital. Everything now is digitized. So everything is pretty much internet facing. So when you have a DDoS event, you can't get access to the patient records, the portals, you name it. It's a significant impact to an organization, but it's not really looked at, like I said, from a singular fashion, because all we hear about is ransomware. And then you and I both know that a DDoS attack can be a precursor to other things happening. So it's very important that organizations prepare for access challenges. And certainly when we talk about healthcare, which is unlike any other industry, what do we have at stake? Patient safety. I talked about the support and care of delivery, but patient safety is very important. So again, if the clinicians cannot operate, if the access to the information they need is not there, it has a severe impact to quality of care, delivering that care, and also trust to an organization, to those patients. They have to have trust that their records and their information is going to be available. And we all know what happened during COVID, right? During COVID, while we had telehealth that was available, everybody moved to a televisit. Now imagine you have all of these appointments scheduled and there's no availability for those patients to meet with their doctors, because a lot of times, clearly, in order to even get your prescriptions now, you have to have a televisit before they will authorize that. So if those things are not available, it has a tremendous impact to, delivery of care, patient safety, and it just really impacts overall, what I say, the delivery of care to our most important constituents, which are those patients.
Yeah, Jeff, I really love how you connected it to something really tangible, right? That availability of patient care, right? Because it's not just the attack itself that people get kind of, they get distracted by, well, this is the cyber attack, but what does that mean to the end customer, the user, the practitioner, right? And speaking of miracles here, we've got Daniel. So Daniel, thanks for joining us. Daniel, we've already kind of gotten the conversation started. I'd love for you to take a second to introduce yourself and why you're here and a part of this conversation today. Jeff's already introduced himself, so the floor is all yours, sir.
Well, so I'm Daniel Lake here. I'd like everyone to believe I know something about technology, but it turns out I have a lot of trouble logging into webinars sometimes. Yeah, I've been in the industry for about 25 years, been working on DDoS stuff, initially at end users, some of the largest in the world, the largest oil and gas company. We're working on cloud security architecture, became really interested in how important availability became in the certain first services you want tied together. Having done that, I did a couple of journeys at a couple of manufacturers, including Radware, where I ran the ADC, WAF, and SSL business globally. But have continued to work in this space and feel very strongly about it. And I think the key thing is understanding that what has always made me find this space interesting is that everyone thinks of DOS and DDoS and they conflate the two, but these two are not the same things. Layer 7 attacks are not the same as layer 3 and 4 attacks, and attacks against specific infrastructure. And so I've become a big Corero fan over the years, and I'm very happy to be here and talk on the webinar today.
Yeah, we're glad you made it. And, you actually hit on something that I would like you to walk us through and kind of, because you've talked about this before, the distinction between DDoS and then just DOS, right? So I'd love for you to kind of really boil it down. What does that mean? What's the distinction? Obviously, more than just the distributed nature of it. If you could just give us a tangible breakdown of the distinction between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talk about denial of service, and a lot of times you'll see DOS and DDoS conflated by everybody, the analysts, when we talk about attack on availability. The original attacks were actually DOS attacks. They would take down a key piece of infrastructure. Think of your state table on your firewall. And we would solve this in a particular, we try to solve it in a particular way. If you think about when DDoS and DOS protection first came out, we'd buy an appliance. Over time, people started realizing those are difficult to manage, and we'd pay somebody who would be our service provider, who's providing the internet, to do it. But that was because at the same time as that was happening, people's attacks had changed. We realized it was easier to just send you nonsense traffic to take up all your bandwidth than it was to take down a particular device. And over the years, this became the most common type of attack because it was easier. And it also became because it was the most common attack, it's what we protected against most. Most people went out and they went to a service provider or a specialized DDoS provider and bought protection against it. The DOS attack, which is either to take down a specific piece of infrastructure that's critical in white line, or it's a layer 7 attack where I attack actually the application, but it's also not volumetric. Those type of attacks reduced in prevalence for quite a long time. But since the start of the Ukraine war, really, we've seen a really large growth in that area, whether it be just attacking infrastructure, using other types of encryption like IPsec. We see this happening a lot quite now in hospitals, where they'll attack via an encrypted method that can't be unencrypted in the cloud. So even if your cloud could see a 1 meg attack, which really, when they look at volume, they can't. If it comes in encrypted and it's encrypted over IPsec, they definitely can. By design, IPsec is not meant to have a man in the middle. With SSL, we can talk about can you, but there are ways of looking in the middle to some extent, but they're definitely not with IPsec. And so we start seeing more and more of these attacks. And all at the same time, it's increasing back in certain industries. We're seeing it being used as a ransomware attack. So, I think people who think that they have ransomware protection and that all they do is have a cloud proxy type solution, they're setting themselves up for potentially a bad surprise.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Jeff, I'd love for you to weigh in on this too, because with your years of experience, I mean, how were you able to keep up with these ever-changing events, right? And the different nature of the style of attacks. I'd love to kind of get your anecdotes and real candid experience, and then offer some suggestions on how organizations, specifically healthcare organizations, should approach this new threat landscape.
Yeah, well, again, great question and great details there, Daniel, when you talk about DDoS and DOS. But I will tell you, Michael, you mentioned, healthcare, where it fits as far as the attack industry. Well, the FBI just released its 2025 report, and sure enough, the healthcare sector is the most attacked industry, not only from a ransomware standpoint, but also a breach standpoint. So as I alluded to before, 2015, healthcare bubbled up with the Anthem breach. Now you look at with how everything is connected, internet facing. DDoS certainly needs to be part of your discussion when we talk not only from a technology standpoint, but from a risk perspective and a patient safety perspective. The reason being, again, as we digitize and we have the EHRs that are connected, you have cloud, you certainly have to be prepared for downtime, which is no one likes downtime at a hospital, right? There's a lot of things that triggers when you cannot take care of your patients. So DDoS fits right in the middle of that. Resiliency is that name of the game. It's the name of the game. So organizations have to be resilient. But the way you stay on top of that is to certainly have that knowledge and intelligence to be able to present to the organization that this is a threat vector, but you wrap that with the perspective of risk. What does this impact? You can't go in there and talk all of the technical jargon. You have to wrap it into the bow that the organization understands. Again, we're talking about healthcare. The number one priority is patient safety and delivery of care. You have to have those positive patient outcomes, but you also have to be able to convey to the clinicians and the senior executives that we need to be prepared for this. And I mentioned before, resiliency. You talk about business continuity, disaster recovery, you wrap those in a neat bow and they become resiliency. So you have to make sure that the organization is prepared. Ransomware is something that we talk about all the time, but we kind of know what that is. We know about EDR and all these solutions that can protect you from that. Well, guess what? Those solutions can't protect you from a DDoS attack. So you have to be looking at it at a different lens, but looking at, again, wrapping it all together to talk the actual language of the organization. And it's about patient safety, resiliency, and access to those patient portals. Because no organization, as we look at it, wants to have, patients where they can't get access to their records, they can't schedule, you can't get data, and we haven't even talked about those third-party suppliers, those vendors. So, they also have to be prepared for this, because as you understand how everything is interconnected here, you mentioned Stryker before. Now, that event was something that was certainly different, but you talked about the event that happened previously over in the UK. All of these things bubble up together, and essentially in healthcare, we look at them as a sentinel event, where again, you are truly impacting patient safety, which is paramount. And I've always said that cybersecurity and patient safety are uniquely intertwined. However, when you look at cyber and healthcare, there's some things that you cannot certainly do, because at the end of the day, you don't want to have a situation where you're causing denial of services to yourself. You don't want to have those services denied for your operational purposes, nor for the patients who need those services.
Thanks for connecting the dots there, Jeff. That's a great response. Daniel, I'd love for you to weigh in, because you speak to a lot of healthcare professionals as well, and I'd love to sort of hear the questions that they ask you specifically around DDoS vendors, and also tap into managed solutions, right? Because it is a lot to take on, right? And hospitals by nature already have alert fatigue. There's already a lot going on. So I'd love for you to provide the color that from your own experience in talking to these professionals, and then sort of the importance on why a managed solution should be considered.
So I think one of the reasons that people I talked about the business reason why people didn't use on-prem solutions, and it ties into your managed discussion. There's a lot of the same thing you'll find with the WAF. And I think that's important, right? When we're looking at DOS, we also need application level security, layer 7 protection. And what people found is it was just too difficult to manage these things and tune them. And so they went to a service. The problem is the attacks have changed, and we actually need to have our own solutions on-prem in addition to cloud, right? These really need both, because the cloud solution.
Oh, might have lost him.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jeff, I mean, I think you can talk to the managed solution too, because I think what I just said around, alert fatigue, I think is resonant, right? So maybe you can talk to a little bit about why you think sort of a very well thought holistic solution with the managed capability would be important for somebody sitting in your role.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You mentioned alert fatigue, and you have to also mention resources. So as you look at, the SIM, SOAR, your firewalls, all of those things going on, now you bring in a different type of, threat vector, different type of attack, and you don't want to have everybody retooled and everybody has to look at everything. So having a managed service to be able to, not only detect but respond for you is highly important. As we look at this new world, and I hate to bring it up, but everybody's talking about it, AI. You
have to drop that buzzword.
That's right. I had to hit that out.
So
you look at AI, you cannot respond to these attacks in a human factor. I love to say, keep the human in the loop. However, when things go bump in the night at 2 a.m., you're certainly not going to have that human in the loop. So what better approach can you have than to have some third parties there, your support extension of your team, to help manage the solution, help tune the solution, and respond to what's happening for your organization. It goes an extremely long way with being able to sleep at night, knowing that you have the experts watching your environment, watching what's going on across the globe. And you've highlighted the geopolitical impact as well. We talked about Ukraine. Now we talk about the conflict as it's happening now. Certainly the Iran conflict has caused all types of alerts. CISA has put out alerts, joint FBI, NSA alerts, and Health ISAC put out an alert about 2 weeks ago for healthcare organizations to be on the lookout for DDoS. And it's very specific, because we know that when it comes to healthcare, when services are not available, when patients can't access their portals, your third-party vendors, which there are a lot of third parties that support hospitals, if they cannot deliver to the organization, all of a sudden, while it may be that third-party vendors outage, your patients do not look at it that way. It is your outage because they need to get access. They cannot schedule their surgeries. They cannot get access to their prescriptions. They can't have those telehealth visits. It is a tremendously impactful and degrading situation for healthcare when you have this type of attack. And again, all we hear about in the media is ransomware, but this type of attack has tremendous impact and, I'll say, negative connotations to life safety situations for healthcare, because again, it is very unique. It is like no other industry. The pucker factor goes way high when you're dealing with people's lives versus maybe have some materials that may not be there. Someone can't order something on a website. It's totally different in healthcare because there's so much at stake, and the reputation goes a long way for any organization to be readily available, to get access at any given time. And when you look at EMRs, they're connected as well. So you have a situation where you live in Texas, you go up to New York, someone wants to be able to get access to your medical records, right? You may have a situation there. Imagine if it's not available in a life safety situation. Right. That's what's at stake. So you're looking at DDoS. I cannot have a human watching every single thing 24/7. So that's, again, where a managed service comes in, because they have the expertise, they have the know-how, they're doing this on a daily basis, and they are now an extension to your organization, to your cyber program, and it allows you to be able to have one less thing to worry about other than just looking at what's happening inside of those four walls.
That's great. I mean, the consequences are real and they're dire. And I mean, I really appreciate you highlighting that. So Jeff, I mean, we've talked a lot. We've kind of explained the threat landscape, and you've done a really good job of connecting the dots of why this matters. If I'm a CISO today in a healthcare organization, what would you outline a 30-day plan for preparedness and how to think about this going forward? You know, if you could just kind of give them sort of a next steps of how you would advise them around this conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I would say going in first and foremost, you know, look at your cyber program, but to ensure as you're looking at your cyber program, make sure it does cover DDoS. Do you have protections? Do you have a resiliency plan? Okay, so first I'm going to look at the program. I'm going to ensure that we have the protection to make sure all of our internet facing applications are protected. We can respond to that type of attack. And then I'm going to certainly make sure that we have some tabletop exercises to understand that how we respond to situations that make us go dark, right? Practice those downtime procedures. And then I'm certainly going to talk to my internet providers, right? My ISP. Do they have downstream protection as well, right? Because if I don't have it necessarily at my organization, I want to make sure I have that downstream protection, okay? And then looking at, we can never forget our suppliers. Because again, as you look at a lot of the largest breaches that have occurred, we'll look back, you know, a couple of years ago, we had the Change Health situation. While that was a ransomware event, we see the cascading effect on one third-party supplier having a problem. So you look at what resiliency they have in place. And again, these are questionnaires when you talk about from a GRC standpoint, governance, risk, and compliance. When you have those questionnaires everybody wants to talk about, you certainly want to make sure that's part of the questions when you're looking at applications that you're bringing in your organization. What does their security posture look like? Does it cover any DDoS protection, right? What is their resiliency plan? Because again, as we're highlighting here, it's more than just ransomware. We know, as we've highlighted earlier, a DDoS event could lead to a ransomware event, right? It can lead to a data breach, right? Because while they're telling you all the services are being degraded and is moving slow, you know, it's a smoke screen for them to exfiltrate data outside of your network. So you want to make sure that you have that service that can tell you that as well, right? It's not all about just shutting down the site. Again, a lot of these attacks can be used as a smoke screen leading to something even larger than that. So it is a serious concern. So when I lay out that first 30 days, walking in there, make sure you look at your cyber program, make sure it includes DDoS protection. Then you talk about, you know, your internet facing most critical applications. They need to be available. How are we protecting those? Then you look at a tabletop exercise to make sure that it actually working, and engage if you have a provider that is providing DDoS services to you. Make sure you talk to them. Make sure that you're utilizing the services appropriately, because a lot of times people have services, they have security devices, and they're using maybe 30 to 50% of its capability. It is not tuned sufficiently. And that's why when you talk about managed services, make sure that they are truly an extension of your team and you're getting the best out of them, not just buying a service, but they become a true trusted partner to make sure that you're protecting your organization.
That's all very comprehensive, and it's very exhaustive. I mean, I just, as you're kind of going through the list, but it's absolutely necessary, right? And spoken from somebody who's done it, and it's a really great answer. And you know, we just released our 2026 Threat Intel report, and Daniel spoke about, you know, these layer 7 attacks that are not volumetric in nature. And in our threat intelligence report, we highlighted, you know, 50 different attack vectors in one attack, right? So different vectors, you know, sub 1 gig attacks. So we highlighted last year that 82% of them were sub 1 gig. Well, this year we found out that of that 1 gig, sub 1 gig, that 56% are less than 200 megabit, right?
Wow.
So very small attacks, and what they're doing is reconnaissance, right? And so I think what you're saying is sort of highlighting on the tangible side of, while these actors are coming in, that ransomware is definitely sort of like the effect that you kind of see in the news, but they were doing that DDoS, right? That reconnaissance work to then extract and then, we call it ransom DOS, right? And so I love that you connected the dots there. And I believe we're going to include the threat intel report for everybody who's tuned in today.
Excellent.
But Jeff, I want to give you a second, because we're going to close it out. I'm going to give you a second to sort of like last thoughts. And then also, I would love for those watching, if you're watching and you've got concerns about your own security posture, you're in the healthcare arena, Jeff is an excellent resource, obviously, to speak about this. You've got firsthand knowledge. And so I would love for anybody watching to, contact us directly. We'd love to put you in contact with Jeff. I'm sure Jeff would love to speak with you about this subject and understand what your current needs are. But Jeff, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And again, for those listeners, certainly you can reach out, talk to me about this. As a former CISO for a very large public safety net hospital, certainly am very familiar with DDoS, had a lot of the technology deployed, so I can help you understand how to even present it to your boards to get the approval for that. But beyond that, as we look at healthcare, the threats are not going away. It still remains the top attack industry according to the 2025 report from the FBI. You've heard Michael allude to what he's seen for those attacks that are happening. But you remember, for all of our healthcare professionals, patient safety is paramount. And this needs to be part of your program. You have to look at risk. You have to be able to present this to, if our organization goes down, are we prepared? Do we have something that can defend and ultimately protect patient safety, protect care of delivery of care, if you will, to our patients? And remember, at the end of the day, you are not immune to the geopolitical implications of what's happening. Everything that's going on, from the Ukraine-Russia war to now the Iran conflict, you are connected, and all of us are connected and intertwined. And at any given moment, critical infrastructure can be impacted. Healthcare is part of that 16 critical infrastructure. Again, the most attacked industry. And this is something that you need to pay attention to. DDoS is certainly something you need to pay attention to and be aware of and prepare to defend against. Resiliency is key. So for all of the cyber professionals out there, make sure you're including resiliency as part of your program. Talk to me. You'll have my contact information, and we can have a deep dive discussion on how to make sure that you're roping in DDoS into your overall cyber program. Thank you for the time here, Michael. Back to you.
No, very well said. So we want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Jeff, I hope you'll come back, because this conversation was really enlightening, and I enjoyed it. And Daniel, thank you for the little bit of time that we had with you today. Anyway, great conversation. Thanks for all that tuned in. Jeff, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Yes. All right. Bye-bye.